good afternoon to everyone who's able to join us, and to those, and yeah, I think that would be afternoon for everyone across the country. So welcome, thank you all for joining us, and for those who are watching the recording about this. Uh, I just wanted to make a few quick announcements before we get started with the webinar and talking more about migration. Like always, at the end, we will have a Q&A. So, uh, you know, please write down your questions, or if you don't have any words to write down, um, post them in the comment section, and we'll be able to answer that. Uh, so for those who are here, if you could just please put in the comment section also your name, where you're calling us from, and what institution you're representing today, just so we all can get a sense of where everyone's at today. So again, thank you all for joining us. I want to remind folks to confirm, you know, the group sizes of folks who will be participating in Advocacy Day. Um, if you go on Ignatian Solidarity Network Net's website, and you go to the teach-in kind of site of our website, and in the advocacy section, you'll see a link that will send you to a form where you can confirm how many folks, how big your delegation will be. And that's just more information for our purposes, so we know how many folks you're going to be bringing, how many supplies we might need to have and to share with you, and also so um, for those states who have delegation leaders, for you all to know how many folks there are going to be. So when you go out and meet, schedule meetings with senators. I'm going to drop the link here as well for those uh, who are on the Zoom. So that is the link for the form. And also, quick reminder to folks, because of the reality that we are in the world with COVID-19, with and with kind of some security changes that we are having because um, of January 6th. We will not, Congress will not be accepting, offices will not be accepting large groups in uh, large groups during this year. So because of that, we actually moved advocacy. We moved the meeting with your elected officials to a virtual setting on November 6th, which is the anniversary of the Jesuit martyrs. On that Monday of the teach-in, it will still be considered Advocacy Day, and we will still have a public witness. So please do not go home early, but just know that the day where the actual meeting with your elected officials will be virtually, and that will happen on the 16th with everyone else. Uh, another quick reminder that yesterday's Advocacy 101 and today's webinar on migration, and then tomorrow's webinar on environmental justice are all being recorded and are going to be shared on Swapcard, as well as our advocacy uh, page on the IFCJ website. And tomorrow at the same time will be our Just Environmental Policy webinar, and that will be hosted by my colleague, Brenna Davis. And I also wanted to make sure on that advocacy website, just so you all here, I'm gonna quickly share my screen because I've already mentioned this website a few times now. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knows. So with the, when you jump into our and everyone can see the advocacy website, please nod your hand or give me a thumbs up. Can everyone see the website? Yep. Okay, great. So yeah, so once you're on the IFTJ website or site, sorry, you'll go over here where it says Advocacy Day right here, and you'll get all the information you need. So, like I said, the form to tell us how big your delegation is right here. Um, to book your advocacy meetings, and I hope many of you have already started booking those meetings. To get the emails and contact information is right here. To view a sample email that you can use to send an email to your House members. And for the states of California, New York, Massachusetts, and Ohio, you will have a state delegation leader, and they will be ordering or requesting your Senate meetings, as well as um, right? We're also doing some postcards. So if on the advocacy day on that November 8th, that Monday, we're also asking if your institutions want to make write some postcards and send some messages. Um, you can also try to request to see if you can deliver some postcards to your elected official offices on that day. You would have to probably send one or two uh, representatives from your delegation. The whole delegation will not be able to go, but that is possible. And these are ecology and migration advocacy postcards that you are can print them out, and your students or can fill out, or your fellow parishioners. And the fourth step are the backgrounders. So the migration talking points and the environmental talking points. So please check out this website. It has every information you need to know, everything that any questions you might have about Advocacy Day or the teach-in. Just check that website, and all of that information will be there for all of you. Um, so, shall we'll start. Let's begin talking about migration and talking about what are our asks this year. What are we going to be talking about, and also learning what has happened. A lot has happened since the last time we have advocated for during the teach-in. So um, I also want to briefly introduce my colleague uh, Pedro from the Kino Border Initiative, who he's going to be leading us in our border talking points when we go there. So, all right, and I'm going to share my screen one more time. Alrighty. So to start us off, I just want us to kind of ground ourselves in this quote that we have been using, and if you have seen our backgrounder, our talking point, hopefully you saw this quote from the Pope. Um, it's uh, it's personally one of my favorite quotes that Pope Francis has shared about migration, and this was said in his message from the 2019 World Day of Migrants and Refugees. So Pope Francis said, "We ourselves need to see and then enable others to see that migrants and refugees do not only represent a problem to be solved, but are brothers and sisters to be welcomed, respected, and loved. They are an occasion that gives us the help to build a more just society and a more perfect democracy, a more united country, sorry, uh, and more evangelical Christian community." And I just love this quote from Pope Francis. I love the message, and I think it really helps us to. I hope this can kind of ground us for a minute to really reflect on the work that we're doing, the advocacy that we are advocating for migrants, and what a more welcoming country for immigrants this world could be. Next, one of the big issues that I want to always remind folks about when you go out and you're advocating for your elected officials is I think a lot of times we all feel that we need to be experts in the issues, and we don't. There are um, there are you know folks like me and Pedro. We encounter with elected officials in many occasions and advocating in many different forms or ways, and uh, they hear from us a lot, and they hear from a lot the policies, and we usually can get deep into the weeds of policy. But the reason why they elect staffers really love to hear from all of you is because of the stories that you share, um, because of um, the stories that you have, that how this issue is affecting your own community, how it's affecting um, your own district and your own state. And another thing about when we're going out and we're sharing our stories through um, during an advocacy visit, a lot of times I think folks they think, oh, well, I need to be a migrant, or I need to be an immigrant, I need to be a refugee, I need to be an asylum seeker, I need to have this story of coming to this country to show to really have a story. And I don't think that's true. I think we all have a story in our own way. A lot of us are spending time out of our day decided to do all of these extra steps, to continue emailing staffers just to try to get a meeting with our elected officials, so we can talk to them and continue and make them listen to how we want these issues, and how we want them. We want a more welcoming country for migrants. That in and of itself, why that this issue is so important to you, whether it was through an experience you had, maybe an immersion trip, whether it was immigrants in your own community that you encounter every day. Um, it's those stories. Those are stories in itself, and those are equally as powerful as a story like mine, who I'm a former DACA recipient. So please go and share your story. You just have to be an expert on your story, not an expert on the issue. So the first, one of the kind of three buckets that I would say that we have um, on on migration is one of that is kind of the interior, and that is uh, everything that undocumented immigrants and that are happening in the U.S. in some way and capacity. And so, uh, just so we can kind of understand where we currently are right now, um, there have been since this new Congress and the start of this year, there have been a total of 8 immigration bills that would create a pathway to citizenship for many different of undocumented communities. DACA recipients and TPS holders, undocumented youth, undocumented farm workers, undocumented essential workers, and undocumented immigrants. All of these 8 bills, 4 of them being introduced in the House, and 4 have been introduced in the Senate. Many of these bills kind of mirror each other, are the very same bill that was introduced in both chamber of Congress, but only the House in so far this year and in this Congress, only that House has passed um, 2 of these 8 immigration bills, and and that has been HR 6, the American Dream and Promise Act, that would create a pathway to citizenship for undocumented youth, DACA recipients, and TPS holders. The other bill was the Farm Worker Modernization Act bill, and this bill would create a pathway to citizenship for undocumented farm workers, or those who qualified with, um, within the undocumented farm workers community. And because these have been the only 2 bills, um, that has been the only kind of work that Congress has done in getting us closer to creating a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. In the Senate, um, as many of you might know, you need 60 votes to pass a bill, and we don't. The Senate has realized that they don't have those 60 votes to pass any immigration bill. And because of this reality, um, Democrats, because Democrats are both neutral in the House and the Senate, have tried to bring language in the in this current budget reconciliation process, um, language that would create a pathway to citizenship for um, a few different undocumented communities, uh, DACA recipients and TPS holders, essential workers, undocumented essential workers, and farm workers, undocumented farm workers. Now, because of um, because of politics and normal constraints, um, there have been many versions of what that language would be and um, how would we create a pathway, or right now currently how would we um, give kind of protection to undocumented immigrants. The um, in the current budget reconciliation process, um, there have the parliamentarian has rejected the idea of creating a pathway to citizenship, and right now, Democrats are proposing a a new I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name. It is called. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name, but what it will in a sense do, it would create a blanket of protection. It would be very similar to the DACA program, where a selective group of undocumented immigrants would be able to be protected from deportation. Um, and some will be able to allow to get work authorization. And that is the current form of the budget reconciliation. Now, because it's such a mess right now, um, we our ask for this year for internal or the interior will be asking elected offices to support legislation that would create a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, DACA recipients, TPS holders, farm workers, and undocumented essential workers. This is a broad ask and would allow offices, depending on which offices you will be talking to and where they stand on migration, to really know that you want them to support legislation that would create a pathway to citizenship. And you want to make sure that those different avenues of creating a pathway legislation would ensure that it is affordable for all economic status of undocumented communities and will guarantee that all immigrants are treated with dignity and respect. The next bucket that we are talking about is detention and enforcement. I think one of the exciting things about the teach-in and it being in kind of the middle of the fall, either late October, early November, is we are meeting with elected offices that are currently in the process of appropriations in some way or another. And every year, appropriations, it kind of it really guides where, as a nation, and where does Congress, where do they have their moral values? Because what the appropriation process is deciding how much money does each department within federal agencies, and we are putting uh, our financial resources what we see fit. And when I was in DC working at Network Lobby, Sister Simone Campbell will say the appropriation process and where money was appropriated into what industry agency was was a moral document, and we always had to ensure that funding was going to things that represented our values as a country. And so I always am excited that one of sorry one of our asks is always to ensure that no more funding is being added to CBP and ICE's budget, um, and to ensure that any funding that we um, add um, to uh, to enforcement is really allocated for a community-based system that supports immigrants and their communities. A lot of this funding to ICE and CBP, and especially the funding going towards ICE, would always get, in a way, put into detention centers. And in the last few years, we have seen how immigrants in detention centers, immigrant communities, because of ICE, and migrants and those trying to come to the U.S. That encounter CBP are always treated not with dignity and not with respect. And so we want to make sure that the funding that our appropriation process is being allocated that will support community-based management. And that's why we put it in two different parts, because when we put funding in ICE and CBP, in a way goes to how ICE interacts with immigrants as well as CBP. And we want those funds and how they process immigrants are used in a community-based management system, and as well as the funding that goes into our detention centers, that instead we do not add more funding to the centers, but yet support more of case management programs that we have funded in the past, and every year we give less and less to those programs. Our last bucket, and this is where I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Pedro, is on border.
Thank you very much. So yes, I guess like the reason why we have a unique view of the reality on the border is because we are here. And I always said that a lot of congressional offices and different authorities, they don't want to come to the border because they know that after they come to us and see the repercussion of the immigration policies, the control policies, how they affect human lives, there's no way to go back to where you were. So, and that's actually the thing. So Jose was mentioning at the beginning that it's not about like providing all this information about the specific policy and how it's going, and because they already know that, they already have been briefed about it, but it's about explaining the impact of these policies in human lives. And so we at Kino Border Initiative, we are a humanitarian organization. We're a binational organization because we are both in Nogales, Sonora, but also in Nogales, Arizona. And in Nogales, Sonora, we provide direct humanitarian assistance to migrants that arrive, for whatever reason, even if they are hoping to present an asylum claim before the U.S., or also the ones that have been recently expelled or deported from the United States. And it's not about providing food and shelter. We also have different services, of course, providing psychological support on or connecting them to different resources. But it's also about listening carefully, because that's what drives our advocacy efforts. It's about staying connected to the needs of the migrant community, and take it from there. So what's going on at the border right now? So currently, most of the people that we are serving are individuals and families that arrive to Nogales from southern Mexico or Central America, and their intention is to request asylum as they are fleeing violence or persecution in their home countries or their hometowns, request asylum from the government of the United States. But currently, we have this policy called Title 42 that, using the COVID-19 pandemic as an excuse, are arguing that they want to avoid the spread of coronavirus among the US population. They are keeping asylum seekers and people seeking humanitarian assistance on the other side of the border. So according to both international and domestic law from the US, if a person arrived to the US territory and requests humanitarian protection, they should be given access to the asylum process. I mean, for their claims to be heard. And if they meet the requirements, they should be granted asylum. But that's not what's happening right now. If a family today approaches to the port of entry and requests humanitarian assistance or protection, they are rejected under this so-called health restriction, which is Title 42. But again, it's not only about denying access because of health issues, because again, at the same time, the migrants were saying that the border, they say that it's closed, but people who are considered an essential traveler can come and go as they please. They can cross back to the United States without any issues, as long as their travel is considered essential. So again, trying to save a human life is not considered currently essential, but um, if you're a US citizen that travel to Mexico, I mean, for vacations to the beach with your family, or if you're a legal permanent resident that went to Mexico to have some tacos de carne asada in the other side, and then you're coming back, that is considered essential travel and you're allowed in without further restrictions. So that's the absurd. If it was actually a health measure, it would be equitative and not focusing in a particular group. And the other thing is that, beginning November 8th, Monday, November 8th, the US is lifting the travel restrictions for non-essential travelers. So basically, they are allowing people with a valid visa to come into the United States as long as they are fully vaccinated for COVID-19. But it's not like they forgot asylum seekers, but they intentionally and unnecessarily left them out of this amendment to the restrictions. So on November 8th, anybody will be able to cross if they're fully vaccinated, unless you're seeking humanitarian protection from the US government. And this is not something new. Again, it's not something that, because of the pandemic, but basically they find in the pandemic the perfect excuse, because before Title 42, there used to be other um, programs or protocols to try to limit the access to asylum. So before, we used to have this program called Remain in Mexico, that it meant like if a family approached to the port of entry to request asylum, they would be denied access and asked to wait for several months for their first hearing on their asylum case. So they were kind of like put on a list and then waiting and then allowed in. So the tricky thing is, like, a lot of the asylum seekers that we encounter are coming from Mexico. So how can you choose to make people from different nationalities other than Mexicans to wait in Mexico as if it was a safe country to do so? And other policies to try to prevent or make the access to asylum as hard as possible, such like as a deterrence policy, was the metering. That it was basically the same issue, like try to limit the number. Like, we will only allow let's say 20 people a day to come into the United States to request asylum. Like, if you can choose when you're having the humanitarian issue, when you're fleeing violence or persecution from your home country or hometown. So again, like, these are policies that they don't only lack of sense, but they also lack of humanity, a recognition of human dignity. And that's why we are advocating for an end to Title 42. We are advocating for also opposing any sort of policy that limits access to asylum or that try to externalize the access to asylum. And a lot of our efforts, are not by ourselves. Again, it's about like working directly with the migrant community that we are serving to help them find their voice, working with them uh, with this leadership development. And that's why, our campaigns such as Save Asylum, the marches that have happened here in Nogales, they're always working directly with the migrants that are here. So and when I'm talking about this, it's because there's so very little that I can tell you about the ongoing situation at the border that like myself can explain you. But if you actually hear the story of a migrant in their own words, and actually we have the testimony of Carlota. She's a migrant who actually, she's a migrant leader who coordinated the efforts for our march and vigils in a group that they called Kino Revolucionarios de Kino. And they are asking themselves, from the Biden administration to restore asylum, to, save the right to asylum. So in her own words, we have here Carlota. So this is a really powerful testimony.
Sorry about that, folks. 1 second.
Mi nombre es Carlota. Nosotros decidimos con mi concuña solicitar el asilo por la situación que estamos viviendo en la sierra del estado de Guerrero. Hace 2 años empezaron familias a pelear, ya fuerte, primero era a orillas, ya después era al centro del lugar. Aún habiendo militares, aún habiendo gobierno, como nosotros le llamamos allá, no respetaban. El gobierno igual, después de que se terminaban siempre las balaceras, entonces ellos salían. Fue muy triste, o sigue siendo muy triste, muy angustiante, porque al escuchar las balaceras la única opción que siempre tenías era agarrar a tus hijos y correr al monte, refugiarte en el monte, porque era lo único que tenías. Cuando había muertos, las mismas personas del pueblo, pues los arrastraban a escondernos. ¿Por qué? Porque al llegar el gobierno y bajar a los muertos al pueblo, implicaba un costo muy grande, dinero que pues no tenían para subir y tenían que perder a su familia. Por eso, con el dolor del corazón, tenían que esconder a los muertos hasta que ya el gobierno se iba. Empezaron a quemar casas, a no respetar mujeres ni niños, y por esa situación tan triste, tan lamentable, tuvimos como pensar en la opción de solicitar el asilo. Nos venimos aquí a la frontera de Nogales con la esperanza, con como la sensación de que pudieran darnos el asilo, y llegamos con la sorpresa de que asilo ya no había. Llegamos aquí el día 27 de julio. Tengo 2 hijos y mi cuña tiene 1. Y nos dicen que no. Pues ahora sí que Estados Unidos argumenta la pandemia, el título 42, que es la pandemia. Nosotros ya nos vacunamos, ya nos hicimos la prueba inclusive de COVID ya 2 veces, hemos salido negativos. Llegamos aquí a pagar unas rentas muy caras. Las rentas son demasiado caras. Trabajo casi no te dan porque te piden en la mayoría tu recibo comprobante de domicilio, porque dicen que nosotros nada más a veces vamos de pasada y dejamos el trabajo tirado. En varias de las zonas de aquí ha habido extorsiones. Hemos visto gente que pues porta chalecos, armas, y pues lo único que podemos hacer es cerrar las puertas y las ventanas. De verdad es muy angustiante, muy triste, muy afligido seguir aquí. Como migrante, tomamos la decisión de reunirnos varios, hacer un grupo. Hicimos una marcha en protesta del derecho que tenemos de asilo. Como migrantes tenemos ese derecho. Fue en protesta de esa. Lamentablemente, a la primer familia que entró, que fue acompañada por el obispo de Tucson, Edward, le cerraron la puerta rápidamente sin escucharla, la necesidad, lo que a ella le pasó, su explicación de por qué ella se viene también para acá. Somos muchas familias que estamos aquí paradas. Tenemos esa necesidad, pedimos una protección para nuestros hijos. De verdad lo solicitamos, por lo menos que nos escuchen, que vean cada caso, y si ustedes quieren valorar cada caso que sea necesario, que puedan abrir nuevamente el derecho al asilo. Se los pedimos, por favor, que se toquen el corazón y que realmente cuando estás de este lado, cuando tú sabes o vives, es muy triste, es muy, muy angustiante, y siempre vives como con la incertidumbre de que qué va a pasar el día de mañana, qué es lo que va a pasar con nuestros hijos, con su educación. Pedimos, por favor, que puedan regresarnos el derecho al asilo.
So I'm sure that you agree with me that it's a very powerful, very compelling testimony. And you know, when we were discussing the organization of this march, of this protest, to request the restoration of of asylum, of course, you know, the families mentioned that they were going to try to approach to the port of entry and request asylum, and we try to be like realistic with their expectations, and explain them that more than likely, because of Title 42, they won't be allowed in, that they would be rejected. What we weren't expecting was the way that they did it. You know, like they consider the migrants, the asylum seekers, a threat, and they immediately closed the gate. They closed the port of entry. Nobody was allowed in for about an hour, and then they blame the port closure on the asylum seekers. So that was really difficult to witness, but it was particularly hard on the migrant families that were organizing this. The testimony of Carlota was actually on the last days of September, like within a couple of days after this march happened. And they continue to do some vigils asking this, and they are still planning to do something, you know, orderly and respectfully, but, you know, to remind everybody that asylum seekers are still there waiting, and you know, that even they are glad that people will be able like to reunite with their families, you know, to cross, do some Christmas shopping, like, you know, they are still there, they are still hoping for a chance to present their claims. And that's what we are looking to support them with, you know, to advocate for them and with them for an end of Title 42. So the Biden administration has definitely had many opportunities to restore asylum, to end this policy. And even if they, for a short period of time, like open this small window, what they call the consortium process, that they allowed like a few families that were waiting for months, as I'm mentioning, the access to asylum as the port of entry has been closed for a year and a half now. So basically, some families were allowed to come in, but they immediately shut it again because they got like impressed about this like calling effect. They said that like a lot of asylum seekers were approaching at once. But it's going to be the same, I'm sure. Like if you watch the news on November 8th, you're probably going to witness that there are lines, very long lines of cars waiting to get through the port of entry, because again, the border was closed for tourism as well, and people with visas to cross. So there's probably going to be a large lane, but that it's not making CBP close or restrict the access. They're preparing in advance. They're having more officers and trying to expedite border crossing, and to be able to process people as fast as possible. But again, that response, that anticipation is happening for tourism, but they're not willing to do the same. So again, the asks about regarding the border, number one ask is for an end on Title 42, to fully restore the access to asylum. The other ask has to do with the recent news regarding the so-called migrant protection protocols, or MPP, the Remain in Mexico policy. So we are also asking the Biden administration, particularly for the Department of Homeland Security, to issue a rescission memo to properly end this hideous protocols for good. And the third one has to do with opposing any legislation that limits, the access to asylum, or to pass legislation, actually, like looking at the other way, that grants or like recognizes, people access to protection when they're fleeing violence and persecution.
Great. Thank you, Pedro, for all of that. And I just quickly want to open it up to any maybe questions any of you who are on Zoom might have. All right, if there's no any questions, then I will end. And just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared on StreamYard, or Swapcard, and as well will be up on the advocacy site on ISM's website. So please check that out. A reminder that tomorrow is our environmental justice webinar, so please tune in at the same time with the same link. And we'll see you all in DC. Goodbye. Thank you.